Hello, welcome to another video from the conscientious biologist, Ben Gallagher. This one starts a slightly new topic within body communication. We look at homeostasis and then one specific example of that called thermoregulation. This is from the GCSE specification, and if you haven't done so already, please do subscribe to my channel on YouTube. So let's start off by asking the question, what is homeostasis? Now, I would hope that at some point in your education already you've looked at examples of homeostasis, maybe further down the school when you were younger, or maybe you've done it more recently in class. But homeostasis is a really important survival process for your body. So let's dissect the word to start with. Homeo means same or similar from the Latin, and stasis means non-moving or being constant. So if you take those two parts of the word and put them together, what we're basically saying is that homeostasis translates as staying the same. The stasis homeostasis, staying the same. So this is about keeping conditions inside your body at a constant for your survival. So a few examples of those would be temperature, which we're going to look at in this video. You've got to keep that at a constant. But things like your blood sugar levels, which we'll cover in another video, the level of toxins that you produce must be kept at a constant minimum. Just think about carbon dioxide as an example. You're constantly producing carbon dioxide through respiration, but you've got to constantly be expelling it in your breath and breathing it out. Otherwise, it would build up inside you and kill you. Same with urea. You make urea from excess amino acids. Your liver breaks them down, you put them down, filter them out in your kidneys, you get rid of them in your urine. If you didn't keep those toxins at a low level, they could poison you. And also water. If your water level is decreasing because you're sweating or you're excess breathing out water vapor, you've got to keep drinking. You've got to keep water at a balanced level as well. Now, the reason is because if you don't keep these things in balance, you will die. So it's really important that homeostasis functions correctly in your body to maintain those systems. But as a proper definition, I want you to memorize this one. Homeostasis is the maintenance of a constant internal environment. Those last three words are probably the most important. Constant internal environment. It's the internal parts of your body that need to be kept at a constant for your survival. So let's talk about the mechanism for how that works. And it works by something called negative feedback. And we're going to break that down so that you fully understand it. So let's take this person here. This person is stood there, they're fully in balance, everything's good. I'm going to put a dotted line right up through their middle there to show you the center of balance that that person should be on. Now, if that person moved a little bit in one direction, they're going to go off balance. Now, to prevent themselves falling over, they need to do the negative or opposite of what just happened. So they just moved over in that direction. They moved away from me. So to correct that, they're going to need to push back in the other direction. So if they've gone too far to the right, they're going to need to push to the left because that will push them back onto the balance point. Okay. But if they push too far to the left, remember it's from that person's perspective, so that's to their left. If they push back too far to the left, they're going to overbalance again because they're going to move too far to the left. So they've got to push back to the right to correct it and get themselves back on balance. But of course, if they go too far, they might go too far to the right, and then we start the whole cycle again and it goes round and round and round. What we've got here is something called a negative feedback loop. And this is exactly what you're doing all the time to maintain your balance. If you stand up quickly now when you watch this video and stand on one leg and focus on what's happening on the bottom of your foot, you'll find that you're not still. You might think you're stood there in perfect balance. Focus on the bottom of your foot and you'll notice constant little adjustments and movement. You slightly move to the right, so you push left to slightly rebalance you. It's this constant shifting and adaptations to the situation to maintain balance. This is exactly what homeostasis is. It's loops, just like that one over there, that go, oh, too far that way, negate it. Oh, we've negated it by too far, so negate that, go back. And it's this constant shifting up and down to maintain a roughly central balanced point. This is how you maintain all those conditions up there. This is the essence of homeostasis. So to just summarize that, to maintain balance, all systems must respond to imbalance by doing the negative of the thing that took them off balance. Now that sounds like a really confusing sentence, but just think about it. If you're balanced, something causes you to imbalance, you need to negate that to get you back to balance. But if you overdo it, of course, you'll overbalance the other way as well. And that's a negative feedback system, and it's how homeostatic systems maintain a constant internal environment. So I suggest take a screenshot of this one to explain the concept of homeostasis, and then we're going to look at how your body maintains body temperature. So your body temperature needs to be maintained at a constant, and that is called thermoregulation. Thermo for anything to do with heat, regulation to regulate it. So it's the maintenance of body temperature. Now, warm-blooded animals, like us, maintain body temperature at a constant. Cold-blooded creatures don't, like reptiles and snakes. They rely on the environment, the sunshine, to warm their bodies up, to get them more active. We don't, we maintain our own body temperatures. Now, our body temperature is 36.6 degrees Celsius, okay? Now, that's the optimum temperature for our enzymes. So I need you to just cast your mind back to the enzyme lessons, which were way back in phase 1 in the proteins lessons, but really, really important to everything in biology. So if I pull up the graph that we looked at during that lesson, this is a graph of how temperature along the bottom axis affects enzyme activity. And I've left on there the key words from when I did this one with you. It's proteins 3. Please go back and watch it if this is unfamiliar, because 100% guaranteed this will be in the exam. It always is. The effect of temperature on enzymes. It's so important. Okay. Now, initially, if it's cold, you'll notice on this side of the graph, if it's cold, you're talking about collision theory, because the proteins, the enzymes in this case, and their substrates don't have enough energy to move around. As you give them more energy, more heat, they move around more, they're more likely to collide. If the collision is between the substrate and the active site, they'll form an enzyme substrate complex, break down the substrate into products because you've lowered the activation energy, and they start to work better. In the middle of this graph, you've got the optimum temperature. That's where the enzymes or proteins are working at their absolute best. When you go beyond that, the number of collisions still continues to increase. But after the optimum, the enzymes start to denature, which means they start to lose their shape. And if proteins lose their shape, they unfold, remember, back to their polypeptide form. If they lose their shape, they lose their function. They're no longer complementary to the substrate, so they can't do their job. Now, that is true for all proteins. Proteins do their job if their shape is correct. If they get too hot, they melt, they denature, and they can't do their job. Every protein in your body. And remember, proteins do everything. If they're too cold, they maybe can't move around enough, so the metabolic reactions that they control just won't happen. So it's really important that you keep your body temperature at a constant, because if you got too hot, your enzymes will start to denature. You get too cold, they won't collide enough with their substrates, and you won't have your metabolic reactions that keep you alive. This is why getting a fever, getting hypothermia or hyperthermia are really bad for you because of that change to your proteins. Now, thermoregulation is monitored by the thermoregulatory center, which is in the hypothalamus of the brain. If you think 2 videos back when we looked at the brain, no, 3 videos back, I think, when we looked at the structure of the brain, I pointed out the hypothalamus, just a little region deep in the middle of the brain. It's kind of right in the middle, but there's a part of that that can monitor the blood temperature to the internal conditions within your body. So everything that we talk about now is kind of monitored and controlled by this thermoregulatory center in the brain. Now, just like we talked about a couple of minutes ago with homeostasis, we've got things in loops, a negative feedback loop. So I put human body temperature in the middle there at 36.6, but of course we know you can get too hot. The name for that is hyperthermia, or you can get too cold, which is hypothermia. Try and remember those. Hypo is low. Hyper, think like hyperactive. People are really overly active. It's too hot. Okay, hyper and hypo. So we got to complete this loop now for how the homeostatic system works. So if you're too hot, we've just said that's going to be picked up by the thermoregulatory center in the brain. Now, the thermoregulatory center is going to send a message out to cause 2 things to happen. It's going to make you sweat, and it's going to cause vasodilation. Now in the next slides, we're going to explain what all of these changes are. But when you're hot, you sweat and you vasodilate. Vasodilate, all that really means is your blood runs closer to the skin, so your blood becomes more obvious, so you go red. This is why when you see someone who's been exercising and got really hot, they're sweaty and they're quite often flushed and red. Okay, but we'll explain why those work in a minute. If you're too cold, again, it's the thermoregulatory center detecting it, and the thermoregulatory causes three other changes. Vasoconstriction, which is the opposite of vasodilation, your blood being pulled away from the skin surface. Shivering and goosebumps. You'll notice when you get cold, your skin gets all those little bumps all over it. And when you're shivering and you notice little bumpy skin. We're going to talk about why the goosebumps are functional in a minute. Now, the goosebumps, shivering and vasoconstriction, if they all work correctly, then you should get too hot again. And you've got to keep going round and round this to try and keep you as close to that center of balance of 36.6 degrees. So let's look at how those 5 responses, the sweating, the vasodilation, vasoconstriction, shivering and goosebumps, all do their jobs. But before we move on to those, take a screenshot of this one so that you've got the negative feedback loop to refer to. Okay, so we're going to look at the summary of the responses now. So if you think, I'll try and break this into the response, those 5 things, and its purpose, and then we'll talk about how it works. So if you're too hot, so I've put these in red, the 2 things were sweating and vasodilation. Sweating directly cools you down. Okay, there's mechanisms there that directly cool you down. The vasodilation increases heat loss kind of indirectly by increasing something else. But we'll look at each of those. Then we'll go on to the 3 changes that happen when you're too cold. So I put those in blue. Vasoconstriction reduces heat loss because it does the opposite of vasodilation. Goosebumps actually is linked to insulation. Shivering is the only one of the 3 when you're cold that actually warms you back up. The other 2 try and stop you losing heat. Shivering actually causes you to increase your heat level to get you back on track there. But let's look at those 3 and let's start off with sweating. So what I've put above me, and I need you to understand this, this is kind of a cross section of a very surface bit of my skin. So the air would be the air out here, and we're looking at a thin slice through the skin, which is what you're looking at here. So the bit closest to me, that's a bit deeper into the body. The bit right up next to the air, that's the very surface that you would touch. Okay. Now with sweating, you've got these sweat glands inside the skin with a little tube, a duct that leads to the surface of the skin. And when you're hot, sweat's going to move up through the sweat gland and it's going to make little pools on the surface of your skin. That's why when you're hot, you can feel that you're wet on your surface, because that's the sweat that's basically just been secreted onto your surface. Now that's mostly water. So what you've done is cover yourself in a layer of water. Now, why that's so effective at increasing cooling is because heat from inside your body is going to hit that water. The water molecules are going to absorb it. So the liquid water is going to absorb it. And what happens to liquid particles when they absorb energy? They evaporate. And when they evaporate, those particles of water, the H2O molecules, they'll float off and they now have the energy, the heat that was inside your body. So they've kind of literally stolen your heat energy and flown off with it. But that's really beneficial because they now carry that heat away from you. So to summarize that, if we put this in a box in our table, the mechanism of sweating, and this is what you'll be asked in the exam, you won't be asked to draw a picture like this one, you'll be asked to describe it. So sweat glands secrete sweat onto the skin surface, and the molecules of water absorb thermal energy and float away with it by evaporation. So I put evaporation in capitals because that's the key thing when it comes to sweat. That's what's in the mark scheme. It's evaporation of water to take the energy away with it. It's just a change in state, which you've done in physics. It's liquid to gas, and the gas takes the energy particles away. Let's clear these ones off this diagram now so that we can move on to vasodilation. So in vasodilation, I'm putting up on here now, same skin, but I'm putting across blood that can flow close to the skin surface and blood that can flow a little bit further away, a bit deeper inside the body. Now, if you're hot, the blood vessels closer to the surface literally open up and dilate. That's the word for anything that opens up. So in a previous video when we talked about the pupil getting bigger and smaller, pupil getting bigger means it dilates, it opens up. So that one closer to the surface literally gets wider. So more blood flows closer to the skin surface. You would notice that because you'll see the person has gone all red. But by having blood closer to the surface, it can more easily radiate its heat away into the air. If it can radiate its heat more easily, you lose more heat, you cool down faster. Okay, so blood vessels near the skin surface open up, dilate, so more blood travels nearer the cooler air, so more heat is lost through radiation. So with sweating, the key word was evaporation. With vasodilation, the key word is radiation. You're increasing radiation by dilating blood vessels at the skin surface. Now, if we flip that round and we go straight onto vasoconstriction, in vasoconstriction, you constrict those blood vessels in the surface, you shrink them down, which means more blood has to flow deeper in the body, further away from the skin surface. Okay, you've constricted, vaso for the blood vessels, constricted them at the surface, more blood is kept in, so it lessens how much radiation can be done, so it keeps the heat inside your body. So the summary for that one is that blood vessels near the skin surface close up or constrict. So blood is kept deeper in the body and heat is less easily lost through radiation. Now, if you do this for too long, that's when people can get frostbite, because you might initially pull blood away from the surface, but then your body starts to constrict and pull blood away from any part of you that has a large surface area relative to its volume. Because remember, there was a surface area to volume ratio video, it's in the Transport Through Membranes playlist, that shows that volume is for storage, surface is for exchange. Well, you don't want to exchange heat to your environment if you're cold. You want volume to store it in. So things like fingers, they're almost all surface. There's very little volume. So if you're really cold, you'll constrict the blood flow into your fingers to keep the heat in your hand. And then you might constrict the blood flow to your hand to try and keep it in your arms where there's a bit more volume and depth to try and store that blood. But without blood going to your fingers, of course, the cells in your fingers will die, and those parts of your fingers will die and can turn black and can fall off. Same with your ears, which are almost all surface, and your nose. You would know the word for this. It's frostbite. Frostbite is if you're somewhere really frosty, really cold, you vasoconstrict to any part of your body that has a high surface area relative to its volume to minimize heat loss. But of course, the consequence of that is you might lose fingers or toes or ears or whatever. Okay, right, so that's vasodilation and vasoconstriction. Let's get rid of those blood vessels now so that we can move on to goosebumps. So with goosebumps, we're talking about the body's hairs. Now, goosebumps is pretty pointless for us. If you remember in one of the evidence for evolution videos, we looked at vestigial structures, things that are left over from our ancestral past. Well, goosebumps are one of those. They're leftovers from when we were hairy creatures, when we were apes and monkeys of types before then. Okay, but we can still try and understand it. So we have hair on our body. I've got quite a lot of hair on my arms, look, but I'm not totally covered with it. So it's not acting as a very good insulatory layer at the moment. Same with all creatures, and birds as well. Birds do exactly the same thing because feathers are just evolved hairs that have kind of split out and gone a bit wider. But what happens is if you are cold, small muscles under the skin that are attached to each hair will pull back. And if all of those muscles pull back, they pull the hairs to an upright position. Now, in being in an upright position, lots of air molecules get trapped in between the hairs. You can't trap it if all the hairs are flat, but you pull them upright and you can trap air molecules. Now, the reason why that's really, really important is because air is a brilliant insulator. You think about double glazing in windows that you've got around your home. Double glazing works because you trap a layer of air between two panes of glass, because air is a great heat insulator. If you've got a coat that's like one of those big puffy jackets, The reason why that keeps you so warm is because of all the air trapped inside it. Duvets on your bed full of feathers is just because there's loads of air trapped in between the feathers in your duvet, or foam in your duvet, or whatever you've got. That's what keeps you warm. Air is a great insulator. If you can stand your hairs up, or feathers if you're a bird, you trap the air, you create a layer of insulation. No good for us, sadly, because we don't have enough hair on our bodies anymore to trap enough heat, but we still have the leftover things, which are the goosebumps. The goosebumps, the little bumps in your skin. The reason for these is because when you pull those muscles and pull the hair back, it obviously pushes the skin behind the hair. So if this was the hair, this is skin. If you push back, you push that bit of hair up, you create this bump. So the goosebumps are where the muscles underneath the skin have pulled the hair back and the hair's pushed against the skin. You can notice it. But the key thing about goosebumps is it's these small muscles in the skin that pull the hairs up, right, trapping air all around the body, which acts as an insulator to reduce heat loss. So insulator is the key thing here with goosebumps. Just lastly, with shivering, there's no diagram about shivering because it's not really to do with the skin. The others are all linked to the skin. Shivering is just where all of the muscles in your body involuntarily, so you don't think about it, they start to tremble and shake. Obviously that means they're doing contractions, and if your muscles are contracting, that means that they generate lots of extra heat, and it's that extra heat caused by respiration that warms you up. So I've put a diagram here summarizing the 4 things with the skin, but the shivering is summarized there. Okay, so you've got the key things on the skin there, you've got the hair, you've got the sweat duct, you've got the 2 levels of blood vessels for vasodilation and vasoconstriction, but shivering is separate to the skin ones because shivering is your muscles all over your body. You often notice it with the muscles in your face because when they shiver, that causes your teeth to chatter, which of course is a more comical sign of being really, really cold. Okay, so take a screenshot of this one because this has got the explanations for the 5 responses, and it's got a diagram kind of summarizing or helping you, might just trigger in your brain how to remember those things. Take a screenshot of this one. Okay, so lots of information in this video. Please make sure you got a screenshot of that first one explaining what homeostasis is. Then really importantly, the negative feedback loop for thermoregulation. Explain those 5 changes. Again, it's a really, really common question in the exam, quite often a 6-mark question. Explain how the body responds to changes in temperature. Read the question carefully though, because sometimes it just says, this person went into a very cold environment. Explain how his body coped. In which case you only need to explain the ones that are true for the cold environment, so the vasoconstriction, the shivering, the goosebumps. You're not going to get any marks for explaining sweating if the question was just how do they cope with cold. You only need to describe all 5 if it's explain how they cope with changes in heat. And it can be any mammal because we all use those same homeostatic mechanisms for thermoregulation. So from here, we're going to jump totally onto the second form of body communication, which is using hormones. So thermoregulation was still controlled by the nervous system, signals from the brain, from the thermoregulatory center, sending nervous information to the skin or to the muscles or whatever. We're now looking at the second type of communication, which is by hormones, which use your endocrine system. So head to that one next. It's a totally separate area in the body communication playlist. As always, please do subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. Give this video a like if you find it useful, and do head over to my Facebook page if you're on Facebook. Have a look at all the infographics there, just to broaden your horizons on what's out there in the biological world. Thank you.